Good morning, AxCon. It's good to see everybody here today. It's GW with you here on day 2. Hopefully you're still surviving. Lots of things going on. Hopefully, like me as well, you enjoyed all of yesterday's content. I have a treat for you this morning. We've got a distinguished panel. We're going to talk about how to jumpstart your organization and getting things moving with accessibility. For this particular panel, I think the thing that excites me the most is that the hardest thing to do is really to get started. So some of the ideas you're going to hear here and some of the questions you're going to get to ask will hopefully be things you take back to immediately enable your organization to make a big step forward. I'm going to introduce people briefly, but give them about a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about their, where they work and their pedigree and things they've done and experiences. But with us today, I've got Sarah Fossheim, independent developer and designer. I have Arpitha, Director of Accessibility and Inclusive Design for PwC. I have Zoe Portlock, Senior Accessibility Experience Designer for Hargreaves and Lansdown. Chandra, Independent Accessibility Program Specialist. So I think let's get started with some brief introductions, and I'll send it back to you, please, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Fossheim. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm an independent accessibility specialist located in Oslo, Norway. And my journey into accessibility started, meanwhile, 5 or 6 years ago when I was working for a company in the health industry that was visualizing large amount of data. And that was health data. And in that, we realized that for those data to be ethical and to be used in a way that's safe for patients, it actually had to be accessible. And that caught me into the data viz accessibility black hole, where at that point there was almost no documentation out there, no information about data viz accessibility, no processes in the company. And I was very much in a position where I was the one who had to push for accessibility in the team. And then since then, I moved on to design agencies and also to the educational sector in product teams, where I kind of had a similar experience of being the one who was pushing for accessibility and who was like trying to get the team started and running into roadblocks there. Until 2 years ago, I decided to go freelance and start working for myself as someone focused on accessibility. And right now, the clients I work with are people who actually have made the realization themselves that, hey, I need to start prioritizing accessibility, or the people who had a lot of developers or designers asking for accessibility help, or those who got fined or were scared of getting fined because they were not compliant. So these days, I'm kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum, where everyone is very motivated to work on accessibility, but faces other types of roadblocks. For example, not enough knowledge internally in the company.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Sarah. Let's move on to Arpitha.
Thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone. I'm Arpitha Shetty. My self-description, I'm an Asian Indian woman, and I use she, her as my pronouns. I'm excited to be here at AxCon today to share my experience getting started with accessibility, specifically at PwC, and building our first program here around it. My background is user experience design and product design, and that's how my journey in accessibility started. And specifically here within products and technology at PwC US, I co-lead an accessibility and inclusive design team that is focused on bringing shift-left practices to our product teams and driving a shift in how we design and build products that can be used by everyone. And also doing this at scale across a large product portfolio. And I'm also looking forward to hearing what Chandra, Sarah, and Zoe have to say in terms of their experience as well.
Outstanding. Thank you, Arpitha. Let's move on to Zoe next. Zoe, I believe you're on mute.
Of course I am. Sorry about that. Out of practice with Zoom. Hi, I'm Zoe Portlock. I'm a white woman in her late 20s. I have purple wavy hair and purple tinted glasses, and I use she, her pronouns. So I'm accessibility lead, essentially, in a UX designer role for Hargreaves Lansdown, which is one of the UK's largest investment platforms. So I'm in financial services, but I also do consulting and write articles for the UK disability charity Scope. I'm disabled myself. In short, I'm autistic and have a range of chronic illnesses. So I use a crutch when I walk, and I bring that lived experience into my work too. So I've been in accessibility for about 4 years professionally, but it's been a major interest long before that. And I established digital accessibility at my company from scratch. So leading day-to-day, that can look like consulting and mentoring, advocating, presenting, everything that was needed to build an appetite for accessibility, and now moving into embedding it at scale.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zoe. And finally, let's finish up with Chandra.
Great, thank you. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone. I'm Chandra Carney. I use the pronouns she, her. I am wearing what I call my fun sweater, which has color block print on it in very vibrant colors. I have brown hair. I'm a white woman in my 30s. And I build accessibility programs and strategies for companies. Many years ago, I was tapped to spearhead leading and building a program at Aetna Digital, which was Aetna's first in-house program. This is a major health insurance company in the United States. We launched a full shift left program to enable the entire organization, and it is still thriving over now at CVS after their acquisition. So after a short time in civic tech working on equitable and accessible government projects, I joined Etsy to build the company's latest team program and strategy around accessibility. And most recently, I've been doing the same at New York Times. So I've been building and leading these programs for about 8 years now, typically in product strategy, but my original background is in engineering. So I bring a lot of like technical thinking to these programs as well. I'm really excited to hear from everyone else today and get going.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Chandra. So again, remiss, I'm sorry, GW is getting a slow start this morning. I'll go back and give my non-traditional audio description. So GW, I'm a white male of, let's say, robust build, incredibly handsome, with enough white in my beard to suggest, if not scream, grandchildren. So that usually paints a pretty good picture for everybody. The first question we're going to start out with to talk about it, and I'm a storyteller, so I'll tell a quick story. I remember when I first heard about accessibility, somebody stopped by my office and they said, hey, we have this thing to deal with. It's called, accessibility. And despite the fact that I'd been involved with diversity and inclusion for a long time, as well as, disability, also I'm a former United States Navy sailor. And so, aware of many things, associated with that too, I didn't really know what it meant. And so this first thing to talk about is probably the most monumental thing that you all deal with when you try to get started with accessibility at your company. Is how do you get awareness about that? How do you introduce your organization to what this journey is going to be? And for me, the struggle was first it was accessibility, and then I had to back up to assistive tech, and then I had to back up to disability because I thought I understood disability, but I really didn't. So this is a really big topic area. And as you heard from everybody's introduction, I think we're going to get a ton of great information here. But for this particular thing, I want to pick on Chandra a little bit and see what she has to say about, her initial part of the journey and getting her organization to really understand, why it's important and why we're going to spend some time and effort on it. So Chandra.
Yeah, I think for me, it's so often that people think of accessibility as a feature. So once you start to break that down and start saying out loud, accessibility is not a feature. Accessibility is everyone's responsibility. It's ingrained in your work. It's ingrained in your design, engineering, research, product manager, anyone's work. It's ingrained in leadership's work to make this awareness happen. But once you start saying accessibility isn't a feature to teams, they start understanding this. Same with leadership, really. I think that is one of the key elements that people tend to just not know at first. And then once you can get that going with leadership or with even a grassroots push, people start really investing in it and really looking at it on their own. And so that's one of the main things. I think there's a lot more in terms of a lot of times, unfortunately, maybe a lawsuit drives it, or something else, but I'm sure we'll get into lawsuits at some point later too.
Yeah, and I can add from a PwC perspective, how we started about, with raising awareness. For those who don't know, PwC is a large professional services organization, and our purpose is to build trust in society and solve important problems for our clients, our people, and society at large. And when it comes to our products in tech, we have a large portfolio of products that drive digital transformation for our clients and also products that impact our employee experiences. So raising awareness for us has been a continuous process with both leadership and our product teams. With leadership, it was important for getting the buy-in and getting the investment in, and was critical to acknowledge that there is a need for accessibility and there is a need for an investment to drive that change. With the product teams, it was critical to raise awareness to implement on our accessibility vision. And while scale was always a consideration for us, we took a co-design approach to designing our accessibility program. And we soon realized that, to what you mentioned, Greg, earlier, that not a lot of product teams know where to start with accessibility or what it is and why it's important. So a lot of our initial efforts was around raising this awareness about, what it is and, what it means in their various product roles in terms of implementing and practicing accessibility. So a lot of our initial efforts focused around bridging this knowledge gap. And we knew we were a small team, so we developed resources that our teams were able to access and learn on their own. And some of these included, playbooks and tools and guides that were role-based, and also collaborated with our L&D team to, create curated role-based learning focused on accessibility. But we also realized there was more of the hands-on upskilling needed, which is where our workshops came into effect. That was, again, role-based. So what we see at PwC, it's a continuous process. What started at, what it is, why, and the how. Now we talk about more in context of, how do we measure progress? How do we scale it? And how do we do that in a consistent way? So it's a continuous process in terms of raising awareness and having that continued conversation.
Very good. Thank you, Arpitha. Sarah, Zoe, anything to throw in on this one?
Yeah, I can go for it. So at Hargreaves Lansdown, I started from complete scratch. The first person to mention accessibility in a interview. Started the business in a digital marketing role. So got hired for mentioning accessibility, highlighting that gap in the department. It was a brand new topic. And because of that, I really started on the ground, raising awareness, building an appetite with discipline teams that surrounded mine, dropping into sprint ceremonies or community of practice meetings with a tailored deck, covering the business case, but also highlighting blockers in that area's product or service to make it hit home. The approach meant that often squads were calling for time to work on their accessibility before I ever pitched anything to leadership. So that wider support, the respect, it was great. It was really good backing. So when it did come to pitching to leadership, their buy-in meant I already had plenty of others on board. It caused a small but undeniable uprising, which eventually led to an ambassador program, empowering those people who were particularly engaged to knowledge share throughout their teams and advocate there too.
I love the
also very similar.
Go ahead,
I
Sarah.
have very similar experiences with both the grassroots parts of it and the knowledge sharing and bridging the knowledge gap part of it. Like I noticed that often when people said, I don't want to work on accessibility or I can't fix this issue right now, they don't always mean I really don't want to do it, even though there's also a group of people who just don't want to work on accessibility, but changing those people, their minds is really difficult without burning out. But on the group that says like, oh, I cannot do it, or it will take too much time for my team to do it, or it's too much of an effort for this company, I kind of always felt like it was kind of because they didn't understand fully like how to solve accessibility or what exactly it is or what goes into it, because we have an industry where like historically we haven't really been prioritizing accessibility. It's not part of our education, it's not part of boot camps. A lot of tutorials don't mention it. A lot of tools out there don't have it in their documentation, how the accessibility of it works. So when teams hear, oh, we have to be accessible, they think, yeah, we have to build this big new feature or add this whole new thing, whole new process to our company, where in fact you can just implement it on the design level, on the development level, on the testing level. The product managers can think on how to plan it in, leadership can make sure there's funding for it, and so on. So like I've been working a lot with like building the knowledge gap, making sure that everything is documented, and making sure that it's very easy for developers to, when they, for example, get an issue, that it's not just a violation against WCAG that's documented, but actually that they get some information on how to fix it. Because I've also noticed that once all the developers and designers were on board with it, then it is indeed very easy for leadership to say, hey, let's go ahead with accessibility, because half of the company is asking for it and has some knowledge here and there already.
Awesome, Sarah. Thank you very much. And Zoe, I mentioned I kind of cut Sarah off a little bit, but uprising, I really like the word. It caused a bit of an uprising there. And I think that leads me to ask a follow-up question. This was more of a poll than a question. But we talk about accessibility as kind of a technical problem, but it's really a human problem. So when you recently started communicating about this, did you get A, why are we spending so much time and money for a few people? Or B, I understand that people with disabilities population, the nuances of disability, and that this really is a big deal. What was the typical response you got from people when you just started with disability? And any of you can go first on this one.
I can. So I found in my case, it was just a topic that hadn't come up before. There wasn't someone to bring it to the front and make it a priority. You have the typical myths of that only affects a couple of people, which you're able to debunk with statistics that I can get into a bit later. So it was often just surprise almost, or in the best cases, people saw it as an opportunity to become a better developer or designer. So that's the kind of response. It was just new information, but it was well received and acted upon once people had that. It's just that you need someone to bring it to them and introduce it.
Good. Thanks, Zoe. Arpitha?
Yeah, no, similar. I mean, people wanted to know how to go about it, where to get started, and didn't have the right knowledge or resources to do that. But also to your point, Greg, about the human aspect of it, I think bringing that in the conversation really helped, teams really understand what is the challenge, what is the accessibility challenge for people with disabilities, and what does it look like, and how can you make a difference in your role by making it more usable and accessible to everyone. So I think that is an important part that people are not aware of, and in bringing that into the conversation is important.
Perfect.
Yeah, I've also seen that when actually showing in which way your inaccessible product can harm people or block their access to something important really helps as well. Like actually showing how someone would use your website with a screen reader, and then very clearly highlighting this information, these actions, contacting your doctor, filing your taxes, all of those actions, they're actually not accessible for this group of the population who is already underserved in a lot of ways, because we are very ableist and inaccessible as a society already. So here are the areas where our product is making it worse, or where people are finding friction, and this is how it impacts their life. And I think that has also helped a lot in, maybe not as much on the leadership level, but as very much on the level of the people who are implementing the code and who are designing the products, that really want to make sure that the products they create are not causing harm and are helping people rather than creating more barriers.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I find that it's a bit different at each company too. Sometimes it's leadership is bought in, but they need they don't know where to start, and they're extremely on board though. Maybe they have a personal experience with one of their family members has a disability, so they might be extremely on board, but then middle management kind of gets in the way. There's also times where it's very grassroots driven, and all of the engineers and designers and product and researchers, they want they really want to work on it, but they're getting pressure from leadership that we have to ship fast and ship often. So they don't actually have much time to integrate accessibility because they don't know, like Sarah, you mentioned earlier, it's just not taught in schools or boot camps or anywhere. So they want to learn, but they don't have time, and they're not given time by their leadership on their teams, or, you know, even sometimes high up. But it's sort of like a different at every organization. And I think that's a really fun challenge to unlock, is where there might be friction, or if there is none, that's just wonderful as well.
And also pretty much non-existent, right? I mean, you mentioned the L word and the M word, which we won't spend a lot of time on it, but leadership and management, and the opportunity of blocker or the opportunity of savior that folks like that could play in this. So yeah. I want to move us forward a little bit to the journey, right? So everybody talks about projects as, you know, climbing a mountain, getting to the summit, and then we come back down the other side and we've completed our goals. And I think, you know, accessibility is the same way, right? But it feels like the first part of the journey up the mountain is really just a hike, right? It's not too bad. There are some rocks. It's just a little bit of a steep path, but suddenly you get to this point where if you didn't bring ropes and somebody to help you and some pitons and a hammer, you're not going any further, right? And we all know that this is where the money actually shows up. It's the rubber meeting the road. So people stop just talking about it, and they care about it enough to provide time to do things, money to build things, and finally get into that portion of it. So tell me, what was your inflection point, and what led up to that? If you had one thing, or like a series of a few things, where you finally said, somebody finally said, this is important enough, I'm going to fund it to the degree that we can move it forward, you know, more easily. Out with Arpitha on this.
Thanks, Greg. I think I would like to highlight a couple of things that were kind of key drivers for us to get this started. One, I would say, I mean, I will use the L word, our leadership support and commitment to prioritizing accessibility. It was a key driver for us. You know, our firm is, you know, like most firms, is committed to diversity and inclusion and disability inclusion, which also means equal access to products and technology, and that people with disabilities are not excluded. And while grassroots efforts can start a shift, right? Can start a wave of shift, but the top-down commitment is needed for truly transforming a product organization or a product from an accessibility perspective. And that was really key for us getting started at PwC. And second, I would say our clients. According to one of the recent Forrester research that you might have come across, 8 in 10 companies are now working towards achieving digital accessibility. And more organizations we see are now telling their story about digital accessibility and disability inclusion in their purpose reports and in their ESG reports. And these include our clients as well. And this is something that continues to be a key driver for us as a professional services organization. So those two, I would say, is something that really helped us get started on our accessibility journey.
Awesome. Thank you, Arpitha. Open to other members of the panel?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about lawsuits or audits here. I think so many companies right now are experiencing, we've seen the statistics that litigation is going up year over year, and that's putting a lot of pressure on companies. And then companies are seeing their competitors going for accessibility. But oftentimes a lawsuit might happen at a company, and that sometimes has the binding effect that the company must start a team or must remediate the product, or there are any variety of things that are binding in a lawsuit there. So organizations really need to think deeply about what they've done wrong and what they're missing. Oftentimes then an audit is done, or sometimes even first an audit is done, and then they realize they have no idea where to start, and they really need someone driving this effort. And an audit is not only costly just to run one, to get one, performed on the product, but it's also very costly to stop product work and remediate. So companies start to realize this is very ineffective and maybe we could catch these things earlier on. But again, they just don't know how to do it. So that's often when an accessibility expert is hired, or a consultant is brought in, or a team is staffed to really do that shift left effort to bring in accessibility thinking into ideation stages, into design and research stages, and also into engineering, of course, and QA. But without having experts on your team or at your org, you're just going to be continually in this audit remediation stage, and it's very costly for organizations and really, frankly, uncomfortable for product teams, because that's why they end up not liking accessibility, because they have to stop their fun, cool work and remediate something that they don't really understand how they broke it. So yeah, I often see it through lawsuits or audit driven, which is unfortunate, but I think it's a really good driver.
I'll jump in there. So what I found is that what resonated most was an approach of putting general data in the context of the company. So using general statistics are only a fraction of the impact. It's far more effective if you apply them to your organization, and that includes using broader company strategy and transformation plans in how you're talking about your work. So I just took statistics from our national census and calculated what they would mean in real client numbers. And being able to say, we have at least 350,000 clients who will have accessibility needs, that is hard to dismiss. Also, just championing real voices. So set up an accessibility inbox that was displayed on our website's accessibility page to offer a contact point for accessibility specific assistance or feedback. And from those, you can gather real client case studies and real quotes about blockers being faced. And those can be business essential actions, like adding money to the platform. I found that those were really effective and eye-opening to pretty much any audience I was talking to. So we did a big playback, including those client stories, and also some of those ambassadors I mentioned sharing their progress and what they've been working on. They had some high-up leadership in the audience, and one of them in particular reached out after and said, I want to be your formal sponsor. Let's put some resource behind this and some money behind it. So I just find putting everything in context just carries it much further. Eventually, a little later on, the body that regulates us, the Financial Conduct Authority, announced some legislation that required firms to evidence their efforts to ensure equal access to information and good outcomes to vulnerable clients, including disabled clients. So that really helped. It kind of affirmed all the work that was in the pipeline. So the mixture of the sponsor and that coming in from the regulator really changed things for sure.
Great story. Great story. Sarah?
Yeah, I also, right now, working as an independent person, get a lot of clients who are coming from the place where either they got audited, or they heard that they were about to get audited, or they learned about new regulations, or they first discovered that there are regulations around accessibility that they have to conform to, and did indeed the calculation and realized this is going to be expensive. Like we need, either like we have to do it because someone told them you're going to get fined if you don't, or they realized, oh, if we wait until we get fined, this is going to become a big effort. So they started implementing it. But another side that I've approached it from is, or not necessarily something that I specifically did, but noticed that often accessibility got picked up and got buy-in from leadership just by accident, or because the right people were in the right room at the right time, or the right person read the right JIRA tickets at the right time. And that's also why I think that documentation of accessibility issues and like bringing visibility to the work has been important. I've had it happening once before that, because 2 years prior, I had opened a JIRA ticket and written a couple of notes about screen reader accessibility that wasn't working. Suddenly the topic of accessibility came up again elsewhere, and someone had heard about it and was like, let's check what we as a company are doing, and noticed, oh, there are already 3 JIRA tickets filed with accessibility issues. Let's just get the effort started right now and continue on those. So like, yeah, sometimes I feel like the best buy-in for leadership is not necessarily approaching leadership and saying, hey, can you give us money to work on accessibility, but to get accessibility on everyone's radar and over time, make it more of a systemic change within the company structure and within the way people document and talk and everything about accessibility.
Good. Very, very good. So we're standing at the base of the cliff, and you just talked about what you pulled out of your bag to get to the top. But when you reach in the bag, sometimes what you think you have in there is not the same thing. So for example, I've brought my rope and I reach in and it's not there because somebody thought my bag was too heavy and they took it out. And so they've become my blocker, right? So let's talk about blockers for just a sec before we get to the top of the mountain. What have you done when you hit those type of blockers? And so this would be cultural challenge, organizational change, or even just, I think somebody said earlier, people who don't want to do it for whatever reason. Zoe, I'll pass it to you first on this one.
Yeah, cool. I'd say that the main blocker for me was just complete lack of historical awareness or interest in it. So it was getting dedicated time ultimately to even begin the awareness building and the empathy building. So I'd say getting dedicated time was essential for those first steps, even if it's just one person in your organization having half of their role as accessibility. When I joined, and when I knew that it was for accessibility being a core reason for being hired, the business product area I was given was one of relatively low business as usual work for marketing, meaning that I could dedicate time to benchmarking accessibility. A year later, that was formalized with the title, and then another year or two later, there was a 100% accessibility role. So what worked well in that case for me was that it wasn't a big ask of the business because it was a gradual process whilst I built a stronger business case and network. So I just think like starting small and building over time can really make a difference. Our first training, I pitched for, well, I say it's a small budget, under £10,000 or under $12,000 US. I'm saying that's a small budget in the context of my business because it's a financial services company, but I'm not speaking for yours, especially if you're charities. They're very different situations. But that money was used to train up and mentor one ambassador in each major digital discipline to share knowledge. So that solved the amount of time needed in a way, even if those people had 10% dedicated time. That is establishing something more formal. So again, asking for that money wasn't bursting in and saying, I need this much very early doors. 2 years down the line, that program's still taking on and giving great progress, but dedicated time was definitely the first hurdle, and keeping requests low, at least in the beginning, as not to overwhelm the business with your asks, worked great for me, building that from scratch.
Awesome. Thank you, Zoe. I'm going to jump us forward just a little bit here because there's one that I want to get to right before we get to the audience questions. Now, the whole panel here is on LinkedIn. Certainly connect out. I know Chandra and Arpitha and Sarah are going to have things to say about the blockers, but this final one before we go to the audience is we've made it to the top of the mountain now, right? And so you're looking way out into the distance, and there's going to be somebody who says at the organization, okay, how much, how long, what do I get as a return? What does the downhill side of this look for me? When do I get to a point where it's sunny outside and the water's warm and I'm practicing accessibility just as a matter of the whole process? And in talking to those leadership or senior, the L word, the M word, I don't dislike leaders or managers. In fact, I would dislike myself, right? But I made the same mistakes that many of them make and live through that. So, how do you talk to them about that in terms of the term? I want to start with Sarah on this one.
Yeah, so I've noticed this, that it helps to show them examples and also show them good examples. So I often share especially when talking with leadership that doesn't have much accessibility experience yet and whose team hasn't built a whole repertoire of accessible components yet. So that's just more in the beginning of their journey. I feel like it helps a lot to show, for example, here's a chart that works really well accessibly. That works really well with a screen reader. It's cognitively easily to understand. It works with keyboard interaction. And then showing and actually look at the code, it's almost the same as what the code would have been like effort-wise if it had been inaccessible code. The developer just used the correct properties. The designer made sure to test their colors for colorblindness and color contrasts. The designer documented those things. All of those things combined took an hour here and there, or half an hour here and there in the developers and designers process to write a comment about alt text, to check your colors. Like, it didn't add that much time to it, but look at what kind of inclusive experience they arrived at. And then from there, break it down and show exactly how much time each thing will take, so that they can map it back and realize the cost difference between systemically testing for accessibility, training their employees for accessibility, web accessibility, to once in a while do an audit yourself, maybe, to really make it part of your process. It becomes much more noticeable that it's much cheaper over time and much easier to achieve than to wait until you get that audit and then have to, as you say, stop all processes for 2-3 weeks and everyone is in full chaos trying to learn things. Yeah, it has made, like, what has been the easiest for me has been making it very concrete and showing examples and talking about facts. These are the amount of people you're excluding. This is the amount of benefit you can get.
Awesome. Thanks, Tara. I see Arpitha smiling here, and
Yeah, no, I would love to add. Thanks for noticing the smile, Greg. Appreciate it. We do get a lot of questions around our accessibility progress and, how compliant are our products? How many of them are compliant? Is it done yet? When will it be done? And we continue to raise awareness around that accessibility is a continuous practice. It's not a one-time project, both with leadership and product teams, but we realized that it's not sufficient. This became an important conversation for us as a team to make sure that we are showing progress, but at the same time we continue to drive the change and doing the impact without getting burned out. And we realized that we needed a way to measure and show our progress in a consistent and holistic way that helps us answer these questions, but also helps us understand where we need to focus our efforts towards. So what we did is we built our own maturity model that measures a product team's maturity. And it's simple, but it's so important. We measure, product conformance, of course, but we also look at a product team's knowledge, approach, and use of resources in practicing continuous accessibility. Did the PMs, designers, developers, and QA complete our accessibility training and workshops? Are they doing accessibility testing? Are they testing with people with disabilities? Are they using our accessible design system? And we refined this maturity model over time based on what we have learned from our product teams. And what we are seeing truly shifting drives the true shift left in maturity. So now with leadership, we use maturity levels as a way to show progress and also to show that in a consistent way and highlight that while we have made some progress and be proud of our wins, there's a lot more to do.
Awesome. Awesome. We've got about 1 minute before we go to audience questions, but Chandra, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's, like we were just talking about, just so much digital transformation that needs to be done. And oftentimes managers and leaders want to measure accessibility in terms of exactly what % of audit issues were done this week, but that's the wrong metric to be looking at. Instead, really enabling and empowering an accessibility team is this digital transformation. How many do we offer now? A documentation hub where all of our internal teams can look at our accessibility information and what they should be doing. Do we offer tools that can integrate into the design and engineering lifecycle that the accessibility team has vetted and approved for use among the organization? How much progress have we made in our design system? Are all of our, if we have many design systems and many component libraries, are all of them accessible? So I think oftentimes leadership wants to just narrow in on something really, really small because that's the numbers they've known in the past. But I think that's a really big transformational change, and it just really highlighting that's a culture shift rather than this one-time project to do an audit. But this culture shift needs to happen across the org for this transformational change.
All right, very good. Tilly?
Yes, hi G-Dubs, hi panel, you're awesome. We have a lot of terrific questions from the group. I'm going to share them one at a time. I've put one into our chat. Question number one is this: what has helped you in convincing leadership that accessibility work requires a dedicated team and not just a single accessibility specialist?
Yeah, and so before the panel jumps in on this, I want to give you a little context. So I talked to thousands of people a year about accessibility and hundreds of programs. And frequently I'll say something like, hey, we should get together your team and we'll chat a little bit about this. And they say, I've got the team all ready to go. It's me. I am the team, and that happens so often. So this is the doozy, right? This is the big one. So team, how are they going to fix this? Everybody's got a lot of ideas.
I can start, Greg. So one of the things, for us, it was about scale, right? It's not just one product. It's hundreds of products that need to be accessible and inclusive. So for us, it wasn't one person who can drive that change, drive that shift. It had to be, a team that focuses on it. But the other aspect of it is also that it is a change that needs to happen across functions and across, a product life cycle, right? If you look at addressing accessibility and just remediating the fixes, which, a lot of us have to start with, unfortunately, because we have catch up to do with our products. But in terms of shifting left, it needs to be influencing a shift in mindset from right from the ideation through the design, through the iterative development and testing of the product. And it's a function that needs to run across a product lifecycle, and to drive that transformation, accessibility transformation, it's a team effort, and you require the skills that bring in the diverse design, engineering, learning, and QA lens, along with that accessibility expertise to drive that shift.
I'd agree with that. Like the sheer scale that unravels itself once you start looking at it. It's not just, how's our website doing? It's how are the logged in experience and transactions? How is the mobile app? What's our documentation, alternative format options? Do we have anything in our contracts when we work with third parties that they have to meet certain standards? And what happens if they don't meet those standards? Then what do we do? So many layers. And yeah, you got to think end to end. You can't just fix the color contrast on the app and it's done. It's such a large, continuous task that needs everyone on board, and one person alone cannot bring in processes into QA testing and front-end dev for the website and internal systems. It just, once you start to dig into it, the sheer amount of work that's there, you can prove that that's just not possible with one person. And it needs dedicated time. Like I said, side of desk is one thing, but it gets to a point where your organization thinks that you have more resource than you do as well, when you kind of socialized it too well, and it's all a little downsized. Yeah, so I would say just opening up that can of worms really shows you the sheer level of work that needs to be done, and just communicating that and helping to plan that and what's needed to make a dent in it even.
Awesome. Thank you, Zoe.
Yeah, I
Sarah?
agree with the two previous persons. It's also been my experience that, especially when working with bigger teams, it's on one hand ensuring the accessibility of each feature or each product or each area within the company. It's impossible to do for one person, because you won't put only one person as the UX designer or front-end developer for a 200-person company, for example. So it's a bit the same with accessibility. But on the other hand, accessibility in itself, in my eyes, is kind of a multidisciplinary thing as well. It's not one concept that's accessibility. You have accessibility when it comes to disability inclusion and making sure that your company language is not ableist, making sure that you're actually prioritizing disabled people, making sure that your disabled employees are safe and taken care of. So that's one aspect of it. Then you have the aspect where you want to make sure that you comply with whatever regulations and legal contracts and all those things, where the language is much more maybe for a legal department or for an accessibility person with a more legal perspective on things. And then you get to the training part, making sure that everyone knows about accessibility. Not everyone who knows about accessibility is a teacher or wants to be a teacher or someone who trains on it. And then you have the actual implementation and assisting the teams and doing the accessibility work. So if you look at accessibility that way, it's just impossible to put all of that into one person who A, has all of that knowledge, and B, has all of the time to do this across a complete company. That's just not possible if you lay it out like that.
That's awesome. I have one more question, Greg, that I'd like to try to get in if that's possible.
Tilly, let me go back. So I just want to say one quick thing about this. So the answers are great there, but a lot of times you'll find that the person who's asking you to work by yourself will have an executive assistant. So just tell them that just to manage their calendar. So you manage your own calendar and I'll continue working by myself. You'll always get more people. So anyway, go ahead, Tilly.
That is good. I love it. Real quick for our audience, this panel has agreed to answer all of the questions that have been asked in our Q&A section, and we will post those to the event page afterwards, over the next week or so, because we won't be able to get to everything. And there are a lot of thoughtful questions there. The second one here relates back to the keynote from this morning, and that's why I really want to get it in here, see how you all feel about it. Earlier this morning, in that opening keynote, there was talk about evolution through grassroots. Are you able to comment on how we can affect organization change through a grassroots approach?
Yeah, and so Tilly, so grassroots is just a nice way to say uprising. So obviously I have to pass this one to Zoe first and let her start with that. So let's talk about some uprisings, because I like that. I like that.
I mean, ultimately, if the people implementing the best practice really want to level up, once they are aware that the current way something is built isn't accessible to 20% of the population and it carries this risk and it would be so much more usable, when everyone who is doing the job day to day is asking you for space to make something better, you can't.
Zoe, I think you slipped onto mute.
So sorry.
Oh,
Yes, so basically the uprising thing. If the people who are implementing really want that and they're getting frustrated if they're not able to do that and know that what they're delivering isn't fully accessible, that frustration is not good for teams and squads. And if you already have motivation on the ground in your little uprising, you need to facilitate that. Like I said, once people are aware of this, you can't go back to not seeing it. It's like once you know about the color contrast combination ratings and suddenly you see everywhere that something's very low contrast, it just isn't something you can dismiss once you realize the situation and the impact that accessibility blockers have on disabled people from all angles. Sarah said earlier about booking appointments online, like medical appointments. Like it's not just one company where you're not able to do that independently. In my case, it's your finances, like your livelihood, your pension pot, and that matters, really.
with knowledge, it moves from, maybe unintentional to intentional exclusion, right? Once you've got that there. I saw that Sarah came off mute there pretty quick when Tilly asked that question too. Sarah, do you have a follow-up to that?
Did you say me or Chandra?
I said Sarah, but either of you. I mean, just feel free to remember, just sitting at your table talking, right?
Yeah, so one of my experiences with it has been also answering it from a quite practical point of view, is that by making accessibility very visible and commenting the changes that I did to improve accessibility on each PR, on each Jira ticket, every time I did something accessibility related, I mentioned. And in this thing, I also improved the accessibility there. And when creating a new task, I would mention just a couple of words of what I knew about the accessibility. And with the type of teams where like there wasn't that much knowledge yet and where people weren't really pushing for it that much yet, constantly seeing reminder, like this is something you can do for accessibility. Because as you said, Zoe, like once you know that the color contrast has to be 4.5/1 or 3/1, it's very easy as a designer to keep checking it. And you just know for the rest of your life, now I have to make sure that it's 3/1. And similarly, documenting all of that. And with the previous client, I documented small checklists that designers and developers and testers and everyone across the process could use within their own tasks, just to make sure that everyone would push for accessibility within their own work. Even if the person above them didn't let them work on it, they could still take some action items into their own work and push some accessibility improvements through that then eventually could be shown to leadership and could be raised as, look, we improved it by doing those things.
Perfect.
In terms of grassroots, I think there are a lot of ways that you can, just going back to the last question as well, if you are just one person, it is not enough, you know, that of course any other team like security or performance is not just one person. So if you think of these requirements, we must be performant, we must be secure, we must be private. Those don't just take one person. But if you are one person and you do want to affect change through grassroots, I found that a very effective way to do this is just holding little, either a watching hour where with your team, you know, over a lunch, if you have lunch and learns at your company, you can watch an accessibility talk together, or you can give one to your company. Often companies have little lunch and learns, so you can already just hop on those. Or if you start an accessibility office hours, you might be able to just get some questions going, and then that spreads awareness and really facilitates this grassroots change. You can start an accessibility Slack channel and make it really vibrant, post articles, pull people in who, designers, developers, whatever, who have questions. But there are ways, really concrete, small ways that don't take a ton of time out of your day if you have other obligations. But that pushes the organization towards becoming more accessible if you are creating an uprising.
That's awesome. We are a little bit over, but we have one more question we want to get in. Let's do a lightning round. One sentence to answer this question. The question is in our chat. The question is this: I'm very new with learning all of this. It is daunting. If there was one thing that you wish you would have done at the start of your journey, what would that have been?
I can go lightning fast. I would say, you know, start small and work iteratively and create those short wins.
Perfect. We'll put Chandra on the, let's have a sentence here. One thing.
Oh, this is very tough. I would say, I agree with that one, but it's just for the sake of doing something different, I will say, give a presentation to leadership on the honest state of accessibility. If you are comfortable and in a position, you can do that. Maybe pull, if you can't go straight to leadership, give it to a group of managers and just tell them, you know, here's what I found, and that might be an additional thing.
Perfect. Perfect. We're getting the hook. So Sarah, real quick.
Yeah, agreed with the two previous ones. And in addition, like realize it's a team effort and not something that you yourself have to fix for everyone and for the entire company. If your manager decides not to put budget aside for accessibility and not give you any time to work on it, that's also the company's responsibility. If you try to fix it all yourself, you will burn out.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Zoe?
Yeah, I would say something that I wish I'd done earlier was really start communicating, like intentions, goals, what you're looking at and the scope of it, and being quite having boundaries, like this is what I'm focusing on and this is how it went and this is the success of it. Even one case study, if you get that right and you talk about that, that can be applied in future and it can be used to influence. So you can do it on a smaller scale initially, I would say.
All right, back to you, Tilly. Thanks for the extra minute.
Awesome. Thank you, panel. Thank you, interpreters. Thank you, production people. Thank you, participants. You guys are awesome. Enjoy the rest of today. And bye for now.